Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. So, just to address something that one of my listeners brought it to my attention, he asked a question. Glock does, in fact, sell horse semen. If you didn't know, Gaston Glock was a horse show guy. Glock owns, the company themselves owns several what are called Lipizzaner stallions. This is a very special breed. And they're very sought after for breeding purposes. So Glock on their website does in fact sell horse semen. Anyway, I digress. So something to be aware of, something that's kind of big, and it has some roots in New Mexico, but it's sprouting national blowback, so to speak. Our awesome Senator Martin Heinrich, and I say that in the most sarcastic way possible. He is one who claims he's a fan of the 2A. Every once in a while, you'll see him with a photo op with a gun of some kind or another, and he talks about hunting. One of the pictures that's went around is he was talking about an elk or something. It was a bighorn sheep or a goat of some kind, but it was definitely not an elk. I saw the picture, and I don't remember it because it was a few years ago. But what's hilarious about this, it's hilarious that a man who says he knows something about guns is proposing what he is. And I've talked about this on New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union before. The assault weapons ban that we narrowly avoided last time in the Roundhouse, he's now taken that to the national level, and he's sponsored a bill called the Safer Communities Act. Now, what this is a ban on semi-automatic guns in general. And he does this. He has had to have found some turncoat 2A people, because he's using the same language that he used in New Mexico on a national level to try to get some traction there. Now, I don't believe it has the chops to actually make it through the House or the Senate in their current composure, but after last night's election and the historic voter turnout, meaning the historic lack of voter turnout, I have no doubt that if we don't pay attention and start raising hell about things like this, they will pass it. Now, what does that actually mean to us? Again, I've talked about this before. There's a lot of us who've kind of checked out and don't care anymore. But that doesn't mean to give up the fight. You know, we have to be very cognizant of where we're at and be very vocal, because we're trying to preserve rights and freedoms for the next generation. You know, I have kids. I'm hoping to have grandkids at some point, because I'm that old and my kids are getting that old. I would like to see the Republic preserved in the best way it can be. And if we keep seeing people just not going to the polls, granted it was a primary, and the primaries usually don't have a huge voter turnout, but there was an actual Democrat that ran who was dead, and he won his primary. Now, that says a lot about you don't have to carry a lot to win your primary so you can continue on. It also says a lot to me that there's a lot of people that don't research who they're voting for, in fact. And it also shows that they don't care who you vote for. They're going to put up a candidate, and you're going to have to do your own research. And that's the best way to put it. You know, I could go through and give you line items on who I would vote for or who I wouldn't based on 2A rules. But the reality is I'm a one-issue voter. And I always side on the side of freedom. And if it weren't for the current libertarian candidate being so communistic, I would actually look very hard at a third-party option at the presidential races, at least. At the local races, the Libertarian Party in general, if you've ever been to a libertarian event, you'll find out that libertarians hate each other. So there's no cohesion there, and that means that they're never going to garner enough support to do anything. So I'm kind of always end up in this weird camp of voting Republican, although hating them. And what I mean by hating Republicans is I'm sick to death of both parties, specifically the Republican Party, not having any drive to do anything or no motivation to do anything or stand up for their constituents. You know, at the national level, that's what you're seeing all the time is the Republican Party is the party of do nothing, send a letter. That type of action is not going to work where we're at in the culture war issue fight we're in right now. You need to be very specific, very pointed, and very intelligent. Now, while there's a lot of people like Thomas Massie, like Rand Paul, that keep, pushing people to their edge of their seats, we end up with idiots on the other side. The current Speaker of the House, not Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan would be another one I would consider that at least tries to do what he was elected to do. I think his name's Jim. I forget his name because he's so forgettable, and he's the second or third House Speaker we've had during this session in the Congress nationally, because we've had a very slim Republican majority in the House, and they voted him out because they've continued to vote House Speakers out because they keep just signing off on increasing the debt, which is bad. Our generations are going to fill that. Our next generations are going to fill that for years. In addition to that, they just pretty much lay down every time instead of standing up and fighting for what we actually sent them there for. And that's a problem, especially when you start looking at, especially when you start looking at real key issues. Your rights are a key issue. And for people to get elected on a platform that say that they're going to stand up for your rights and then they don't. That's why I look really hard at local candidates and then look at their voting record. Now, a lot of people will say sometimes you see them compromising on something, but if you look at the overall picture of why that compromise was there and you actually get to talk to the candidate and find out the reason, because I have done this. I've talked to my local reps. I've talked to their opposition to try to get some idea of what it is. And until you do something like that, you won't know what they really stand for. There's some people that are really passionate about serving people and keeping our rights. But then when they get there, they end up getting corrupted by the absolute corruption that is in politics. They get taken by the lobbyists, and the lobbyists start manipulating them and getting them to do things. So that's something to be cognizant of, and that's something to hold them accountable. When I'm talking about historic low voter turnout, Brandon Herrera, one who is a big advocate for the 2A, one who had put on a great national campaign, lost his election by 400 votes in a county that had 29,000 people, registered voters. And that many didn't show up and then some. That guy won by a slim margin because he was able to put on enough heat on Brandon there. Now that says something because this guy has actively voted against 2A rights. And if you're a fan of the 2A as I am, you need to look at those accountability pieces, look at those people and hold them accountable because they're voting away your rights. They're the ones that are voting to say, yeah, let's pass this law. They're also the ones that when the counter to the stuff that's going on in the Supreme Court, when there's actually law that they're trying to pass to say you can't do this, they're the ones that go ahead and side with the blob, the amorphous blob that is the political machine right now, that allows them to keep and maintain status quo. And as long as we keep and maintain status quo, yeah, you may be comfortable, but you eventually are going to lose your rights. And whether you have a prison that is just your house or you have an actual prison cell for standing up and speaking up, I don't know how you want to die or how you want to live, but I'm not going to stand back without speaking my mind and saying, hey, this isn't right, because I'm an American. I firmly believe in our founding fathers and what they did to our country or make our country. Our country is one of the greatest countries on planet Earth, ran by idiots, and we need to fix that. And until we get people in office that actually speak up and say, hey, you need to fix this, we're not going to see any change. And as long as people just keep voting the status quo and not actually doing some of their own research, and if anything, all those idiots that have been telling you not to do your own research, They're the ones that said COVID was a natural occurring thing and was this giant big deal. Never forget what they did to us. This is the time to start holding people accountable. This is the first general election we have in November. And if you're not getting out, since the COVID stuff, if you are not getting out and you're not making your voice known, it doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense to vote in New Mexico specifically. But at least you're giving it a shot. There's nothing like that. I can't explain that more than anything else. Complacency breeds idiocracy, breeds stupidity. And we've seen that the repercussions of that throughout society since the COVID stuff, and it's time to fight back now. Otherwise, all those cool 2A toys you have, the minute you are ever caught with them, and you will be caught because they will start doing more enforcement stuff. And no matter where you go shooting in New Mexico, eventually you're going to run up on some Bubba law enforcement idiot who's going to enforce the law because it's the law. Like, share, subscribe, most importantly, be great.